"No, it is not over yet," said he. "There is more trouble coming. To us. To the steamer and consequently to me, to us, and to all the passengers." "If you are speaking seriously, why did you come on board?" 42 To see what is going to happen, for I should not be at all ill-pleased to witness a shipwreck," replied the doctor, looking at me knowingly. "Is this the first time you have been on board the Great Eastern?" "No, I have already made several voyages in her, to satisfy my curiosity." "You must not complain then." "I do not complain. I merely state facts and patiently await the hour of the catastrophe." Was the doctor making fun of me? I did not know what to think. His small, twinkling eyes looked very roguish, but I thought I would try him further. "Doctor," I said, "I do not know on what facts your painful prognostics are founded, but allow me to remind you that the Great Eastern has crossed the Atlantic 20 times, and most of her passages have been satisfactory." "That's of no consequence. This ship is bewitched, to use a common expression. She cannot escape her fate. I know it and therefore have no confidence in her. Remember what difficulties the engineers had to launch her. I believe even that Brunel who built her died from the effects of the operation, as we doctors say." "Ah, doctor," said I, "are you inclined to be a materialist?" 43 Why ask me that question? "Because I have noticed that many who do not believe in God believe in everything else, even in the evil eye." "Make fun if you like, sir," replied the doctor, "but allow me to continue my argument. The Great Eastern has already ruined several companies. Built for the purpose of carrying emigrants to Australia, she has never once been there. Intended to surpass the ocean steamers in speed, she even remains inferior to them. From this," said I, "it is to be concluded that—" "Listen a minute," interrupted the doctor. "Already one of her captains has been drowned, and he one of the most skillful, for he knew how to prevent this rolling by keeping the ship a little ahead of the waves." "Ah well," said I, "the death of that able man is to be regretted." "Then," continued Dean Pitferge without noticing my incredulity, "strange stories are told about this ship. They say that a passenger who lost his way in the hold of the ship, like a pioneer in the forests of America, has never yet been found." "Ah," exclaimed I ironically, "there's a fact." "They say also that during the construction of the boilers, an engineer was melted by mistake in the steam box." "Bravo," cried I, "the melted engineer, Ben Travato, do you believe it, doctor?" 44 I believe, replied Pitferge. "I believe quite seriously that our voyage began badly, and that it will end in the same manner." "But the Great Eastern is a solid structure," I said, "and built so firmly that she is able to resist the most furious seas like a solid block." "Solid she is, undoubtedly," resumed the doctor, "but let her fall into the hollow of the waves, and see if she will rise again. Maybe she is a giant, but a giant whose strength is not in proportion to her size. Her engines are too feeble for her. Have you ever heard speak of her 19th passage from Liverpool to New York?" "No, doctor." "Well, I was on board. We left Liverpool on a Tuesday, the 10th of December. There were numerous passengers and all full of confidence. Everything went well so long as we were protected by the Irish coast from the billows of the open sea. No rolling, no seasickness. The next day even the same stability. The passengers were delighted. On the 12th, however, the wind freshened towards morning. The Great Eastern, heading the waves, rolled considerably. The passengers, men and women, disappeared into the cabins. At 4 o'clock the wind blew a hurricane. The furniture began to dance. A mirror in the saloon was broken by a blow from the head of your humble servant. All the crockery was smashed to atoms. There was a 45 frightful uproar. 8 shore boats were torn from the davits in one swoop. At this moment our situation was serious. The paddle wheel engine had to be stopped. An enormous piece of lead, displaced by a lurch of the vessel, threatened to fall into its machinery. However, the screw continued to send us on. Soon the wheels began turning again, but very slowly. One of them had been damaged during the stoppage, and its spokes and paddles scraped the hull of the ship. The engine had to be stopped again, and we had to content ourselves with the screw. The night was fearful. The fury of the tempest was redoubled. The Great Eastern had fallen into the trough of the sea and could not right herself. At break of day there was not a piece of ironwork remaining on the wheels. They hoisted a few sails in order to right the ship, but no sooner were they hoisted than they were carried away. Confusion reigned everywhere. The cable chains, torn from their beds, rolled from one side of the ship to the other. A cattle pen was knocked in, and a cow fell into the ladies. saloon through the hatchway. Another misfortune was the breaking of the rudder chock, so that steering was no longer possible. Frightful crashes were heard. An oil tank weighing over 3 tons had broken from its fixings and, rolling across the 'tween decks, struck the sides alternately like a battering ram. Saturday passed in the midst of a general terror, the ship in the trough of the sea all the 46th time. Not until Sunday did the wind begin to abate. An American engineer on board then succeeded in fastening the chains on the rudder. We turned little by little, and the Great Eastern righted herself. A week after we left Liverpool we reached Queenstown. Now who knows, sir, where we shall be in a week. Chapter 9. It must be confessed the doctor's words were not very comforting. The passengers would not have heard them without shuddering. Was he joking, or did he speak seriously? Was it indeed true that he went with the Great Eastern in all her voyages, to be present at some catastrophe? Everything is possible for an eccentric, especially when he is English. However, the Great Eastern continued her course, tossing like a canoe, and keeping strictly to the loxodromic line of steamers. It is well known that on a flat surface, the nearest way from one point to another is by a straight line. On a sphere it is the curved line formed by the circumference of great circles. Ships have an interest in following this route, in order to make the shortest passage, but sailing vessels cannot pursue this track against a head wind, so that steamers alone are able to maintain a direct course and take the route of the great circles. This is what the Great Eastern did, making a little for the northwest. 48 The rolling never ceased. That horrible seasickness, at the same time contagious and epidemic, made rapid progress. Several of the passengers, with wan, pallid faces and sunken cheeks, remained on deck in order to breathe the fresh air. The greater part of them were furious at the unlucky steamship, which was conducting herself like a mere buoy, and at the freighter's advertisements, which had stated that seasickness was unknown on board. At 9 o'clock in the morning, an object 3 or 4 miles off was signalled from the larboard quarter. Was it a waif, the carcass of a whale, or the hull of a ship? As yet it was not distinguishable. A group of convalescent passengers stood on the upper deck, at the bows, looking at this waif which was floating 300 miles from the nearest land. Meanwhile the Great Eastern was bearing towards the object signalled. All opera glasses were promptly raised, and there was no lack of conjecture. Between the Americans and English, to whom every pretext for a wager is welcome, betting at once commenced. Among the most desperate of the bettors I noticed a tall man, whose countenance struck me as one of profound duplicity. His features were stamped with a look of general hatred, which neither a physiognomist nor physiologist could mistake. His forehead was seamed with a deep furrow. His manner was at the same time audacious and listless. 49 His eyebrows nearly meeting, partly concealed the stony eyes beneath. His shoulders were high and his chin thrust forward. In fact, all the indications of insolence and knavery were united in his appearance. He spoke in loud, pompous tones, while some of his worthy associates laughed at his coarse jokes. This personage pretended to recognize in the waif the carcass of a whale, and he backed his opinion by heavy stakes, which soon found ready acceptance. These wagers, amounting to several $100s, he lost everyone. In fact, the waif was the hull of a ship. The steamer rapidly drew near it, and we could already see the rusty copper of her keel. It was a 3-mast ship of about 500 or 600 tons, deprived of her masts and rigging, and lying on one side with broken chains hanging from her davits. The waif was the hull of a ship. Had this steamship been abandoned by her crew? This was now the prevailing question. However, no one appeared on the deck. Perhaps the shipwrecked ones had taken refuge inside. I saw an object moving for several moments at the bows, but it turned out to be only the remains of the jib lashed to and fro by the wind. The hull was quite visible at the distance of half a mile. She was a comparatively new ship, and in a perfect state of preservation. Her cargo, which had been shifted by the wind, obliged her to lie along on her starboard side. 50 The Great Eastern drew nearer and, passing round, gave notice of her presence by several shrill whistles, but the waif remained silent and unanimated. Nothing was to be seen, not even a shore boat from the wrecked vessel was visible on the wide expanse of water. The crew had undoubtedly had time to leave her, but could they have reached land, which was 300 miles off? Could a frail boat live on a sea like that which had rocked the Great Eastern so frightfully? And when could this catastrophe have happened? It was evident that the shipwreck had taken place farther west, for the wind and waves must have driven the hull far out of her course. These questions were destined to remain unanswered. When the steamship came alongside the stern of the wreck, I could read distinctly the name Lerida. but the port she belonged to was not given. A merchant vessel or a man-of-war would have had no hesitation in manning this hull, which undoubtedly contained a valuable cargo, but as the Great Eastern was on regular service, she could not take this waif in tow for so many hundreds of miles. It was equally impossible to return and take it to the nearest port. Therefore, to the great regret of the sailors, it had to be abandoned, and it was soon a mere speck in the distance. The group of passengers dispersed, some to the saloons, others to their 51 cabins, and even the lunch bell failed to awaken the slumberers, worn out by seasickness. About noon Captain Anderson ordered sail to be hoisted, so that the ship, better supported, did not roll so much. Chapter 10. In spite of the ship's disorderly conduct, life on board was becoming organized, for with the Anglo-Saxon nothing is more simple. The steamboat is his street and his house for the time being. The Frenchman, on the contrary, always looks like a traveler. When the weather was favorable, the boulevards were thronged with promenaders, who managed to maintain the perpendicular, in spite of the ship's motion, but with the peculiar gyrations of tipsy men. When the passengers did not go on deck, they remained either in their private sitting rooms or in the grand saloon, and then began the noisy discords of pianos, all played at the same time, which, however, seemed not to affect Saxon ears in the least. Among these amateurs I noticed a tall, bony woman who must have been a good musician, for in order to facilitate reading her piece of music, she had marked all the notes with a number, and the piano keys with a number corresponding, so that if it was note 27, 53 she struck key 27, if 53, key 53, and so on, perfectly indifferent to the noise around her, or the sound of other pianos in the adjoining saloons, and her equanimity was not even disturbed when some disagreeable little children thumped with their fists on the unoccupied keys. Whilst this concert was going on, a bystander would carelessly take up one of the books scattered here and there on the tables, and, having found an interesting passage, would read it aloud, whilst his audience listened good-humouredly, and complimented him with a flattering murmur of applause. Newspapers were scattered on the sofas, generally American and English, which always look old, although the pages have never been cut. It is a very tiresome operation reading these great sheets, which take up so much room, but the fashion being to leave them uncut, so they remain. One day I had the patience to read the New York Herald from beginning to end under these circumstances, and judge if I was rewarded for my trouble when I turned to the column headed, Private. MX begs the pretty Miss Z, whom he met yesterday in 25th Street omnibus, to come to him tomorrow at his rooms, number 17 St. Nicholas Hotel. He wishes to speak of marriage with her. What did the pretty Miss Z do? I don't even care to know. I passed the whole of the afternoon in the Grand Saloon 54 talking and observing what was going on about me. Conversation could not fail to be interesting, for my friend Dean Pitford was sitting near me. "Have you quite recovered from the effects of your tumble?" I asked him. "Perfectly," replied he, "but it's no go." "What is no go, you?" "No, our steamship, the screw boilers are not working well, we cannot get enough pressure." "You are anxious, then, to get to New York?" "Not in the least, I speak as an engineer, that is all. I am very comfortable here, and shall sincerely regret leaving this collection of originals which chance has thrown together, for my recreation." "Originals," cried I, looking at the passengers who crowded the saloon, "but all those people are very much alike." "Nonsense," exclaimed the doctor, "one can see you have hardly looked at them. The species is the same, I allow, but in that species what a variety there is. Just notice that group of men down there with their easy-going air, their legs stretched on the sofas, and hats screwed down on their heads. They are Yankees, pure Yankees from the small states of Maine, Vermont, and Connecticut, the produce of New England. Energetic and intelligent men, rather too much influenced by the 55 reverends, and who have the disagreeable fault of never putting their hands before their mouths when they sneeze. Ah, my dear sir, they are true Saxons, always keenly alive to a bargain. Put two Yankees in a room together, and in an hour they will each have gained $10 from the other." "I will not ask how," replied I, smiling at the doctor, "but among them I see a little man with a consequential air, looking like a weathercock, and dressed in a long overcoat with rather short black trousers. Who is that gentleman?" "He is a Protestant minister, a man of importance in Massachusetts, where he is going to join his wife, an ex-governess advantageously implicated in a celebrated lawsuit." "And that tall, gloomy-looking fellow, who seems to be absorbed in calculation?" "That man calculates, in fact," said the doctor. "He is forever calculating. Problems." No, his fortune, he is a man of importance. At any moment he knows almost to a farthing what he is worth. He is rich, a fourth part of New York is built on his land. A quarter of an hour ago he possessed $625,367.50, but now he has only $1,625,367.25. 56. How came this difference in his fortune? Well, he has just smoked a $quarter cigar. Dr. Dean Pitford amused me with his clever repartees, so I pointed out to him another group stowed away in a corner of the saloon. They, said he, are people from the far west. They, said he, are people from the far west. The tallest, who looks like a head clerk, is a man of importance, the head of a Chicago bank. He always carries an album under his arm with the principal views of his beloved city. He is, and has reason to be, proud of a city founded in a desert in 1836, which at the present day has a population of more than 400,000 souls. Near him you see a Californian couple. The young wife is delicate and charming. Her well-polished husband was once a plowboy, who one fine day turned up some nuggets. That gentleman is a man of importance, said I. Undoubtedly, replied the doctor, for his assets count by the million. And pray who may this tall individual be, who moves his head backwards and forwards like the pendulum of a clock? That person, replied the doctor, is the celebrated Cockburn of Rochester, the universal statistician, who has weighed, measured, proportioned, and calculated everything. Question this harmless maniac, he will tell you 57 how much bread a man of 50 has eaten in his life, and how many cubic feet of air he has breathed. He will tell you how many volumes in quarto the words of a Temple lawyer would fill, and how many miles the postman goes daily carrying nothing but love letters. He will tell you the number of widows who pass in 1 hour over London Bridge, and what would be the height of a pile of sandwiches consumed by the citizens of the Union in a year. He will tell you. The doctor, in his excitement, would have continued for a long time in this strain, but other passengers passing us were attracted by the inexhaustible stock of his original remarks. What different characters there were in this crowd of passengers! Not one idler, however, for one does not go from one continent to the other without some serious motive. The most part of them were undoubtedly going to seek their fortunes on American ground, forgetting that at 20 years of age a Yankee has made his fortune, and that at 25 he is already too old to begin the struggle. Among these adventurers, inventors, and fortune hunters, Dean Pitford pointed out to me some singularly interesting characters. Here was a chemist, a rival of Dr. Liebig, who pretended to have discovered the art of condensing all the nutritious parts of a cow into a meat tablet, no larger than a 5-shilling piece. He was going to coin money 58 out of the cattle of the Pampas. Another, the inventor of a portable motive power, a steam horse in a watch case, was going to exhibit his patent in New England. Another, a Frenchman from the Rue Chapon, was carrying to America 30,000 cardboard dolls, which said Papa with a very successful Yankee accent, and he had no doubt but that his fortune was made. But besides these originals, there were still others whose secrets we could not guess. Perhaps among them was some cashier flying from his empty cash box, and a detective making friends with him, only waiting for the end of the passage to take him by the collar. Perhaps also we might have found in this crowd clever genii, who always find people ready to believe in them, even when they advocate the affairs of the Oceanic Company for lighting Polynesia with gas, or the Royal Society for making incombustible coal. But at this moment, my attention was attracted by the entrance of a young couple, who seemed to be under the influence of a precocious weariness. They are Peruvians, my dear sir, said the doctor, a couple married a year ago who have been to all parts of the world for their honeymoon. They adored each other in Japan, loved in Australia, bore with one another in India, bored each other in France, quarrelled in England, and will undoubtedly separate in America. 59. And, said I, who is that tall, haughty-looking man just coming in? From his appearance I should take him for an officer. He is a Mormon, replied the doctor, an elder Mr. Hatch, one of the great preachers in the City of Saints. What a fine type of manhood he is! Look at his proud eye, his noble countenance and dignified bearing, so different from the Yankee. Mr. Hatch is returning from Germany and England, where he has preached Mormonism with great success, for there are numbers of this sect in Europe who are allowed to conform to the laws of their country. Indeed, said I quite thought that polygamy was forbidden them in Europe. Undoubtedly, my dear sir, but do not think that polygamy is obligatory on Mormons. Brigham Young has his harem because it suits him, but all his followers do not imitate him, not even those dwelling on the banks of the Salt Lake. Indeed, and Mr. Hatch has only one wife, and he finds that quite enough. Besides, he proposes to explain his system in a meeting that he will hold one of these evenings. The saloon will be filled. Yes, said Pitford, if the gambling does not attract too many of the audience. You know that they play in a 60-room at the Bows. There is an Englishman there with an evil, disagreeable face who seems to take the lead among them. He is a bad man with a detestable reputation. Have you noticed him? From the doctor's description, I had no doubt but that he was the same man who that morning had made himself conspicuous by his foolish wagers with regard to the waif. My opinion of him was not wrong. Dean Pitford told me his name was Harry Drake, and that he was the son of a merchant at Calcutta, a gambler, a dissolute character, a duellist, and now that he was almost ruined, he was most likely going to America to try a life of adventures. Such people, added the doctor, always find followers willing to flatter them, and this fellow has already formed his circle of scamps, of which he is the centre. Among them I have noticed a little short man with a round face, a turned-up nose, wearing gold spectacles, and having the appearance of a German Jew. He calls himself a doctor on the way to Quebec, but I take him for a low actor and one of Drake's admirers. At this moment Dean Pitford, who easily skipped from one subject to another, nudged my elbow. I turned my head towards the saloon door. A young man about 28 and a girl of 17 were coming in arm. A newly married pair, asked I. No, replied the doctor in a softened tone. An engaged couple who are only waiting for their arrival in New York to get married. They have just made the tour of Europe, of course with their family's consent, and they know now that they are made for one another. Nice young people, it is a pleasure to look at them. I often see them leaning over the railings of the engine rooms, counting the turns of the wheels, which do not go half fast enough for their liking. Ah, sir, if our boilers were heated like those two youthful hearts, see how our speed would increase. I often see them leaning over the railings of the engine room. Chapter 11. This day at 12:30, a steersman posted up on the Grand Saloon door the following observation. Lat. 51 degrees 15 N. Long. 18 degrees 13 W. Dist. Fastanet 323 miles. This signified that at noon we were 323 miles from the Fastanet lighthouse, the last which we had passed on the Irish coast, and at 51 degrees 15 north latitude, and degrees 13 west longitude, from the meridian of Greenwich. It was the ship's bearing, which the captain thus made known to the passengers every day. By consulting this bearing, and referring it to a chart, the course of the Great Eastern might be followed. Up to this time she had only made 320 miles in 36 hours. It was not satisfactory, for a steamer at its ordinary speed does not go less than 300 miles in 24 hours. 63 After having left the doctor, I spent the rest of the day with Fabian. We had gone to the stern, which Pitford called walking in the country. There alone and leaning over the taffrail, we surveyed the great expanse of water, while around us rose the briny vapours distilled from the spray. Small rainbows, formed by the refraction of the sun's rays, spanned the foaming waves. Below us, at a distance of 40 feet, the screw was beating the water with a tremendous force, making its copper gleam in the midst of what appeared to be a vast conglomeration of liquefied emeralds. The fleecy track, extending as far as the eye could reach, mingled in a milky path the foam from the screw, and the paddle engines, whilst the white and black fringed plumage of the seagulls flying above, cast rapid shadows over the sea. Fabian was looking at the magic of the waves without speaking. What did he see in this liquid mirror, which gave scope to the most capricious flights of imagination? Was some vanished face passing before his eyes and bidding him a last farewell? Did he see a drowning shadow in these eddying waters? He seemed to me sadder than usual, and I dared not ask him the cause of his grief. After the long separation which had estranged us from each other, it was for him to confide in me, and for me to await his confidences. He had told me as much of his past life as he wished me to know, his life in the Indian garrison, his hunting and adventures, but not a word had he said of 64, the emotions which swelled in his heart, or the cause of the sighs which heaved his breast. Undoubtedly, Fabian was not one who tried to lessen his grief by speaking of it, and therefore he suffered the more. Thus we remained leaning over the sea, and as I turned my head I saw the great paddles emerging under the regular action of the engine. Once Fabian said to me, "This track is indeed magnificent. One would think that the waves were amusing themselves with tracing letters. Look at the L's and E's. Am I deceived? No, they are indeed always the same letters. Fabian's excited imagination saw in these eddyings that which it wished to see. But what could these letters signify? What remembrance did they call forth in Fabian's mind? The latter had resumed his silent contemplation, when suddenly he said to me, "Come to me, come, that gulf will draw me in." "What is the matter with you, Fabian?" said I, taking him by both hands. "What is the matter, my friend?" "I have here," said he, pressing his hand on his heart, "I have here a disease which will kill me." "A disease," said I to him, "a disease with no hope of cure." "No hope." And without another word, Fabian went to the saloon, and then on to his cabin. Chapter 12. The next day, Saturday, 30th of March, the weather was fine and the sea calm. Our progress was more rapid, and the Great Eastern was now going at the rate of 12 knots an hour. The wind had set south, and the first officer ordered the mizzen and the topmast sails to be hoisted, so that the ship was perfectly steady. Under this fine sunny sky the upper decks again became crowded. Ladies appeared in fresh costumes, some walking about, others sitting down. I was going to say on the grass plats beneath the shady trees, and the children resumed their interrupted games. With a few soldiers in uniform, strutting about with their hands in their pockets, one might have fancied oneself on a French promenade. At noon, the weather being favourable, Captain Anderson and 2 officers went on to the bridge, in order to take the sun's altitude. Each held a sextant in his hand, and from time to time scanned the southern horizon, towards which their horizon glasses were inclined. "Noon," exclaimed the captain after a short time. Immediately a steersman rang a bell on the bridge, and all the watches on board were regulated by the statement which had just been made. Half an hour later, the following observation was posted up. Lat. 51 degrees 10 N. Long. 24 degrees 13 W. Course 227 miles, distance 550. We had thus made 227 miles since noon the day before. I did not see Fabian once during the day. Several times, uneasy about his absence, I passed his cabin, and was convinced that he had not left it. He must have wished to avoid the crowd on deck, and evidently sought to isolate himself from this tumult. I met Captain Corsican, and for an hour we walked on the poop. He often spoke of Fabian, and I could not help telling him what had passed between Fabian and myself the evening before. "Yes," said Captain Corsican, with an emotion he did not try to disguise. "2 years ago Fabian had the right to think himself the happiest of men, and now he is the most unhappy." Archibald Corsican told me in a few words that 67 at Bombay Fabian had known a charming young girl, a Miss Hodges. He loved her, and was beloved by her. Nothing seemed to hinder a marriage between Miss Hodges and Captain Mac Elwyn, when, by her father's consent, the young girl's hand was sought by the son of a merchant at Calcutta. It was an old business affair, and Hodges, a harsh, obstinate and unfeeling man, who happened at this time to be in a delicate position with his Calcutta correspondent, thinking that the marriage would settle everything well, sacrificed his daughter to the interests of his fortune. The poor child could not resist. They put her hand into that of the man she did not and could not love, and who, from all appearance, had no love for her. It was a mere business transaction, and a barbarous deed. The husband carried off his wife the day after they were married, and since then Fabian has never seen her whom he has always loved. This story showed me clearly that the grief which seemed to oppress Fabian was indeed serious. "What was the young girl's name?" asked I of Captain Corsican. "Ellen Hodges," replied he. "Ellen, that name explains the letters which Fabian thought he saw yesterday in the ship's track. And what is the name of this poor young woman's husband?" said I to the captain. "Harry Drake." 68 Drake, cried I, "but that man is on board." "He here," exclaimed Corsican, seizing my hand and looking straight at me. "Yes," I replied, "he is on board." "Heaven grant that they may not meet," said the captain gravely. "Happily they do not know each other, at least Fabian does not know Harry Drake, but that name uttered in his hearing would be enough to cause an outburst." I then related to Captain Corsican what I knew of Harry Drake, that is to say, what Dr. Dean Pitford had told me of him. I described him such as he was, an insolent, noisy adventurer, already ruined by gambling and other vices, and ready to do anything to get money. At this moment Harry Drake passed close to us. I pointed him out to the captain, whose eyes suddenly grew animated, and he made an angry gesture which I arrested. "Yes," said he, "there is the face of a villain, but where is he going?" "To America, they say, to try and get by chance what he does not care to work for." "Poor Ellen," murmured the captain, "where is she now?" "Perhaps this wretch has abandoned her, or why should she not be on board?" said Corsican, looking at me. He made an angry gesture which I arrested. This idea crossed my mind for the first time, but rejected it. No, Ellen could not be on board. She could not have escaped Dr. Pitford's inquisitive eye. No, she cannot have accompanied Drake on this voyage. "May what you say be true, sir," replied Captain Corsican, "for the sight of that poor victim reduced to so much misery would be a terrible blow to Fabian. I do not know what would happen, for Fabian is a man who would kill Drake like a dog. I ask you as a proof of your friendship never to lose sight of him, so that if anything should happen one of us may be near to throw ourselves between him and his enemy. You understand, a duel must not take place between these two men. Alas, neither here nor elsewhere. A woman cannot marry her husband's murderer, however unworthy that husband may have been." I well understood Captain Corsican's reason. Fabian could not be his own justiciary. It was foreseeing from a distance coming events, but how is it that the uncertainty of human things is so little taken into account? A presentiment was boding in my mind. Could it be possible that in this common life on board, in this everyday mingling together, that Drake's noisy personality could remain unnoticed by Fabian? An accident, a trifle, a mere name uttered, would it not bring them face to face? Ah, how I longed to hasten the speed of the steamer which carried them both. Before leaving, Captain Corsican promised to keep a watch on our friend, and to observe Drake, whom on his part he engaged not to lose sight of. Then he shook my hand and we parted. Towards evening a dense mist swept over the ocean, and the darkness was intense. The brilliantly lighted saloons contrasted singularly with the blackness of the night. Waltzes and ballad songs followed each other, all received with frantic applause, and even hurrahs were not wanting, when the actor from T, sitting at the piano, bowled his songs with the self-possession of a strolling player. Chapter 13. The next day, the 31st of March, was Sunday. How would this day be kept on board? Would it be the English or American Sunday which closes the bars and the taps during service hours, which withholds the butcher's hand from his victim, which keeps the baker's shovel from the oven, which causes a suspension of business, extinguishes the fires of the manufactories, which closes the shops, opens the churches, and moderates the speed of the railway trains, contrary to the customs in France? Yes, it must be kept thus, or almost thus. First of all, during the service, although the weather was fine and we might have gained some knots, the captain did not order the sails to be hoisted, as it would have been improper. I thought myself very fortunate that the screw was allowed to continue its work, and when I inquired of a fierce Puritan the reason for this tolerance, "Sir," said he to me, "that which comes directly from God must be respected. The wind is in his hand, the steam is in the power of man." I was willing to content myself with this reason, and in the meantime observed what was going on board. All the crew were in full uniform, and dressed with extreme propriety. I should not have been surprised to see the stokers working in black clothes. The officers and engineers wore their finest uniforms, with gilt buttons. Their shoes shone with a British lustre, and rivaled their glazed hats with an intense irradiation. All these good people seemed to have hats and boots of a dazzling brightness. The captain and the first officer set the example, and with new gloves and military attire, glittering and perfumed, they paced up and down the bridges awaiting the hour for service. The sea was magnificent and resplendent beneath the first rays of a spring sun, not a sail in sight. The Great Eastern occupied alone the centre of the immense expanse. At 10 o'clock the bell on deck tolled slowly and at regular intervals. The ringer, who was a steersman, dressed in his best, managed to obtain from this bell a kind of solemn, religious tone, instead of the metallic peals with which it accompanied the whistling of the boilers, when the ship was surrounded by fog. Involuntarily one looked for the village steeple which was calling to prayer. At this moment numerous groups appeared at the doors 73 of the cabins, at the bows and stern. The boulevards were soon filled with men, women and children carefully dressed for the occasion. Friends exchanged quiet greetings, everyone held a prayer book in his hand, and all were waiting for the last bell which would announce the beginning of service. I saw also piles of Bibles, which were to be distributed in the church, heaped upon trays generally used for sandwiches. The church was the great saloon, formed by the upper deck at the stern. the exterior of which, from its width and regularity of structure, reminded one very much of the hotel of the Minister des Finances in the Rue de Rivoli. I entered. Numbers of the faithful were already in their places. A profound silence reigned among the congregation. The officers occupied the apsis of the church, and in the midst of them stood Captain Anderson as pastor. My friend Dean Pitford was near him, his quick little eyes running over the whole assembly. I will venture to say he was there more out of curiosity than anything else. At 10:30 the captain rose, and the service began. He read a chapter from the Old Testament. After each verse the congregation murmured the one following, the shrill soprano voices of the women and children distinctly separate from the baritone of the men. This biblical dialogue lasted for about half an hour, and the simple, at the same time impressive ceremony was performed with a 74 puritanical gravity, Captain Anderson assuming the office of pastor on board, in the midst of the vast ocean, and speaking to a crowd of listeners, hanging, as it were, over the verge of an abyss, claimed the respect and attention of the most indifferent. It would have been well if the service had concluded with the reading. But when the captain had finished, a speaker arose, who could not fail to arouse feelings of violence and rebellion where tolerance and meditation should reign. It was the reverend gentleman of whom I have before spoken, a little fidgety man, an intriguing Yankee, one of those ministers who exercise such a powerful influence over the states of New England. His sermon was already prepared, the occasion was good, and he intended to make use of it. Would not the good Yorick have done the same? I looked at Dean Pitford. The doctor did not frown, but seemed inclined to try the preacher's zeal. The latter gravely buttoned his black overcoat, placed his silk cap on the table, drew out his handkerchief with which he touched his lips lightly, and taking in the assembly at a glance. "In the beginning," said he, "God created America and rested on the seventh day." Thereupon I reached the door. Chapter 14. At lunch Dean Pitford told me that the reverend gentleman had admirably enlarged on his text. Battering rams, armed forts, and submarine torpedoes had figured in his discourse. As for himself, he was made great by the greatness of America. If it pleases America to be thus extolled, I have nothing to say. Entering the grand saloon, I read the following note. Lat 50 degrees 8 N. Long 30 degrees 44 W. Course 255 miles. Always the same result. We had only made 1,100 miles, including the 310 between Fastenet and Liverpool, about a third part of our voyage. During the remainder of the day, officers, sailors, and passengers continued to rest in accordance with established custom. Not a piano sounded in the silent saloons. The chessmen did not leave their box or the cards their case. The billiard room was deserted. I had an 76 opportunity this day to introduce Dean Pitford to Captain Corsican. My original very much amused the captain by telling him the stories whispered about the Great Eastern. He attempted to prove to him that it was a bewitched ship, to which fatal misfortune must happen. The yarn of the melted engineer greatly pleased the captain, who, being a Scotchman, was a lover of the marvellous, but he could not repress an incredulous smile. "I see," said Dr. Pitford. "I see," said Dr. Pitford, "the captain has not much faith in my stories." "Much, that is saying a great deal," replied Corsican. "Will you believe me, captain, if I affirm that this ship is haunted at night?" asked the doctor in a serious tone. "Haunted," cried the captain. "What next? Ghosts, and you believe in them?" "I believe," replied Pitford. "I believe what people who can be depended on have told me. Now I know some of the officers on watch, and the sailors also, are quite unanimous on this point, that during the darkness of the night a shadow, a vague form, walks the ship. How it comes there they do not know, neither do they know how it disappears." "By St. Dunstan," exclaimed Captain Corsican, "we will watch it well together." "Tonight?" asked the doctor. 77 tonight, if you like. And you, sir," added the captain, turning to me, "will you keep us company?" "No," said I do not wish to trouble the solitude of this phantom. Besides, I would rather think that our doctor is joking." "I am not joking," replied the obstinate Pitford. "Come, doctor," said I, "do you really believe in the dead coming back to the decks of ships?" "I believe in the dead who come to life again," replied the doctor, "and this is the more astonishing as I am a physician." "A physician?" cried the captain, drawing back as if the word had made him uneasy. "Don't be alarmed, captain," said the doctor, smiling good-humouredly. "I don't practice while travelling." Chapter 15. The next day, the 1st of April, the aspect of the sea was truly spring-like. It was as green as the meadows beneath the sun's rays. This April sunrise on the Atlantic was superb. The waves spread themselves out voluptuously, while porpoises gamboled in the ship's milky track. When I met Captain Corsican, he informed me that the ghost announced by the doctor had not thought proper to make its appearance. Undoubtedly, the night was not dark enough for it. Then the idea crossed my mind that it was a joke of Dean Pitford's, sanctioned by the 1st of April, for in America, England and France this custom is very popular. Mystifiers and mystified were not wanting. Some laughed, others were angry. I even believe that blows were exchanged among some of the Saxons, but these blows never ended in fighting, for it is well known that in England duels are liable to very severe punishment. Even officers and soldiers are not allowed to fight under any pretext whatever. The homicide is subject to the most 79 painful and ignominious punishments. I remember the doctor telling me the name of an officer who was sent to a convict prison for 10 years for having mortally wounded his adversary in a very honourable engagement. One can understand that in face of this severe law, duels have entirely disappeared from British customs. The weather being so fine, a good observation could be made, which resulted in the following statement: lat. 48 degrees 47 and degrees 48 W. L. dist. 250 miles only. The slowest of the transatlantic steamers would have had the right to offer to take us in tow. This state of things very much annoyed Captain Anderson. The engineers attributed the failure of pressure to the insufficient ventilation of the new furnaces, but for my part, I thought that the diminution of speed was owing to the diameter of the wheels having been imprudently made smaller. However, today, about 2 o'clock, there was an improvement in the ship's speed. It was the attitude of the two young lovers which revealed this change to me. Leaning against the bulwarks, they murmured joyful words, clapped their hands, and looked smilingly at the escape pipes which were placed near the chimneys, the apertures of which were crowned with a white wreath of vapour. The pressure had risen in the screw boilers. As yet it was only a feeble breath of air, a wavering blast, but our young friends drank it in eagerly with their eyes. No, not 80, even Denny's Papin could have been more delighted when he saw the steam half raise the lid of his celebrated saucepan. They smoke, cried the young lady, whilst a light breath also escaped from her parted lips. Let us go and look at the engine, said the young man, placing her arm in his. Dean Pitford had joined me, and we followed the loving couple on to the upper deck. How beautiful is youth, remarked the doctor. Yes, said I, youth affianced. Soon we also were leaning over the railing of the engine rooms. There, in the deep abyss at a distance of 60 feet below us, we saw the 4 long horizontal pistons swaying one towards the other, and with each movement moistened by drops of lubricating oil. In the meanwhile the young man had taken out his watch, and the girl, leaning over his shoulder, followed the movement of the minute hand, whilst her lover counted the revolutions of the screw. 1 minute, said she. 37 turns, exclaimed the young man. 37.5, observed the doctor, who had entered into the work. And a half, cried the young lady. You hear, Edward? Thank you, sir, said she, favouring the worthy Pitford with one of her most pleasing smiles. Chapter 16. Going back to the Grand Saloon, I saw the following programme posted on the door. This night. Part First. Ocean Time, Mr. Mac Alpine. Song Beautiful Isle of the Sea, Mr. Ewing. Reading, Mr. A Follett. Piano Solo, Chant du Berger, Mrs. Allouch. Scotch Song, Dr. T. 10 minutes interval. Part Second. Piano Solo, Mr. Paul 5. Burlesque, Lady of Leon, Dr. T. 82 Entertainment, Sir James Anderson. Song Happy Moment, Mr. Norville. Song You Remember, Mr. Ewing. Finale. God Save the Queen. As may be seen, it was a complete concert with a first part, entr'acte, second part and finale, but it seems there was something wanting in the programme, for I heard someone mutter behind me, "What, no Mendelssohn?" I turned and saw that it was a steward, who thus protested against the omission of his favourite music.